start with, cool. So
Got
Gamal,
it.
so what was the genesis of this book? Because obviously it's a huge project.
Well, this project is actually about two-thirds of the size of the last book, and the genesis for this book kind of came out of the first book. When I originally envisioned the project, it was going to be a much more massive idea because I was going to actually cover the entire business of independent comic book publishing, the
Yes.
entire business of freelance comic book publishing, and the entire business of creator-owned comic book publishing
Wow.
in one book. But I talked to a gentleman that I worked with for a long time at Marvel, and he said that was a ridiculous idea because that book would take like 8 years to write,
Yes.
and no one would buy it because they'd be too intimidated by it, and you would burn yourself out. So he said, do it, make it a limited series, make three of them, and then the
Yes.
people who want to buy the whole set, the completionists, will buy the whole set. So I finished the first book in 2020, and that had a very good response from the community. The Kickstarter was back like 600%. It
Yes.
continued to sell after, the Kickstarter campaign. And I always planned to do the freelance portion as a follow-up because that business model is so different. The economic incentives are different. The legal relationships are different. The business model is different. So that's how I knew that I was going to have to do a freelance portion to follow up on the independent portion. And depending on how the freelance portion sells, we will do the creator-owned portion as well.
Okay. So obviously your background is in law. So obviously you have a very analytical brain, which I guess helps. And obviously you've written the other book before. So does that help, structuring a book? I mean, obviously, as a lawyer, you're no stranger to, to the worlds of this sort of approach to things. I mean, do you obviously have a very analytical brain? And obviously that helped you to structure the first book and also the second one. Would you say, is that a fair comment for yourself?
Yeah, a lot of it comes from the fact that when you're talking to comic book creators who are particularly creative minded, there's usually a lot of education process going along with representing them as clients. It's
Yes.
not like representing someone who's in pharmaceutical or
Yes.
who's in automotive because they think they already have the answer. Where a comic book creator knows they don't have the answers. They have a lot of questions. So
Yes.
a lot of the book is structured, and the first book as well is structured in a question and answer format. Like I posed the question, well, what is marketing for a freelance comic creator? Then we go about breaking down that structure. This is what marketing is. This is how it applies to you as a freelance creator. This is how you structure your marketing, particularly to seek out clients, connect with clients, and then get clients because it's going to be the client job, the publisher, whoever it is that hires you. It's going to be
Yes.
their job to market the comic by and large. You have to market your services and your reputation. So we kind of structure it in a question and answer format. That way, it's also easier for someone who buys the book and they have a particular question about one aspect of this business. They just go to that question and then the answer will be right there. It's designed kind of to help them because I don't think quite a few people are going to read this book cover to cover. It's more like they have a particular question about a particular topic. They could go to that chapter, go to the questions in that chapter, and then the entire thing is not as intimidating.
Yes. So what did you learn from writing the first book that you've been able to apply structurally and in terms of your approach to the second book?
Well, what I realized with the first book is that if you explain the structure of the particular business model in a simple way, you can then expound on those ideas because the books have to be approached from the standpoint that you are explaining business and legal concepts to a community that A, may not be familiar with them, and B, doesn't really want to know them. Comic book creators approach me and they approach like the business side of it, kind of like going to the dentist. They know they're supposed to go, and eventually they will go, but they don't want to go. They would actually prefer not to if they could. but they know they can't because so what I learned is create a simple structure and then start off with the assumption that they have no idea what you're talking, and then build on the simple structure to explain the more complex concepts, and whenever possible, use references and analogies that they are comfortable with or familiar with. So anytime you can put in the reference to a comic book character or a scenario like that, they'll, oh, I get it. I understand now. So, like, for example, the way I always explain copyright to people is I say, well, copyright is a story. The difference between copyright and trademark, a copyright is a story,
Mm.
and a trademark is an image used to tell that story. The story could be a very rich young man suffers a violent criminal event but survives, and then uses his wealth to create the resources and get the skills to fight crime outside the laws of vigilance. That's a story. And it's probably the most original story you have ever heard. I can copyright that
Yes,
story, but
yes.
if in that story that person happens to have some sort of animal fetish for whatever reason,
Mm.
that image can then be used to tell the story, and everything else is not nailed down. That's a
Yes,
trademark.
yes.
And I have used that very simple concept to kind of explain the fundamental structures of intellectual property law in ways that a comic creator can understand it.
Yeah. So obviously the concepts of freelance is such a huge subject with so many
Mm-hmm.
different permutations, and it's constantly shifting. The comic industry has been constantly shifting, not just because of COVID, because it changed the industry. And, a lot of comic publishers have either, gone to the wall, or they've changed, or they've evolved. Or, I mean, how exactly do you pin down, the concept of freelancing in something which is, where the sands are shifting so regularly? Well, I assume that was quite a big problem for you creating the structure of this book.
Well, the structure, the fundamental structure, no matter who the client pool happens to be or what particular jobs are out there in the industry, the fundamental core stays the same.
Yes,
You have to figure out what you can offer to the industry. That's your foundation.
yes,
You have to find the clients that actually want the services you offer. You have to connect with them and you have to get into a contract with them. You have to make sure that you are compensated for the work you do. That's your fee. And
yes,
then you have to actually finish the work on time, under
yes,
budget, in a way that gets you more work. So it basically boils down to foundation, find, fee, finish. That's the whole structure of being a freelance comic book creator. And it doesn't matter if you're the cover artist or the letterer or you're the print manager, because a lot of smaller publishers don't actually understand how printing works. So it's not just the creative side, it's the business side as well.
yes,
So you might be their print manager, you might be their web designer, you might be their sales and marketing person standing behind the booth at a convention. There's all sorts of jobs you may have, but as long as you actually focus on foundation, find, fee, finish, everything else you could actually sort out.
yes. I know you've worked with Joe before, and I know what Joe's skills are, but what for you has Joe brought to this project and the previous project? He has a lot of different skills, but what would you say are the main skills that he's brought to bear here?
Well, there's two main aspects that make Joe invaluable for this project. He originally did the foreword for the first book,
Yes,
and I asked him to do that because I knew he actually understood the perspective of starting a company and having that company run on a consistent basis
yes,
in a way that wasn't structured as a intellectual property farm or a fly-by-night operation.
yes,
Working with him on that project was so beneficial, and then he became my client for some of the things that he was working on. So then when it was time to do this book, knowing that Joe worked for years bringing in and working with freelancers, and then being a freelance artist himself, he actually understood both sides of the entire process and could actually he could actually verify or challenge anything that I put into the book as well. That's not really the way how it works, or this is
Yes.
something that we need to focus in on. And the other thing is there's a huge amount of credibility that comes from knowing the people who most of the people in the comic book industry already know. It was very similar when I had Mike Martz edit the first book.
Yes.
You bring in people who have been in the business for decades, who already have that positive reputation. So when I say, okay, I wrote this book and this person's name is attached, the social proof is already there. I'm just basically riding Joe's coattail.
So Joe, I want to bring Joe in a little. So Joe, what I mean, obviously your input's been pretty, great with this book. So what do you see, your role with this book, and what have you achieved? What have you done, working with Gamal? What have you got out of it, I guess, to get down to kind of brass tacks? Joe, what have you managed to get out of working on a book like this?
So, what my job is, as I see it, is to help Gamal sharpen the narrative
Yes.
that he's creating for the book, right? It's, on a very basic level, it's things like, punctuation, or, hey, how about switching this word to that word? But on a larger level, the book has a narrative.
Yes.
And it's my job to help sharpen and focus that narrative for the comic book industry veteran, as well as new people about to enter the industry, right? I'm a graduate of the School of Visual Arts that is well known for their cartooning program. They have a number of comic book professionals there as instructors. And when I was reading this book as I was editing it, I was thinking about new graduates entering the comic book industry, and how vital a book like this would be for them, how vital a book like this is for someone who's maybe been in the business between 5 and 10 years, but has struggled to how to manage their career, right? To your point earlier, like the rest of the world, the comic book industry was profoundly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially on an economic level. And I think part of what that did was it shook us all up to how precarious a career in the comic book industry is. And so when Gamal put out the first book, I was really honored to do the introduction. I saw the necessity of it. When I read this second book, I understood how crucial it was. So what I got out of it was actually kind of like my own personal refresh as an independent contractor that works inside and alongside the comic book industry, but also the profound honor of being able to help facilitate getting this out there, because it is crucial that the participants in this industry are able to have solid foundational lifestyles.
So
go ahead. And one of the things that I just continue to learn dealing with creators is how many of them don't know certain basics in how to represent themselves with clients, how many of them may be afraid to do that for fear of losing a job, even though taking certain steps protects them long term. So this book really lays things out in a way that gives creators the full picture and the full palette of options about how to approach their careers going forward.
Actually, I have a question for both of you. How important was it for this book to be as honest as possible, to lay things out and say certain things that people might not find that palatable, but these are things that have to be said because, you know, I've known you a long time, Joe, and you've had some, as we say, some interesting experiences, you know, with a number of different companies that you work for.
One or two.
But you know, how important was it? And it's a question for Gamal as well, for this book to be really honest and say, look, you know, this is not an uncomfortable thing to talk about, but it has to be discussed. This has to be considered when you are talking to a company, when you're offering your services, either as a writer or as an artist, or as a, you know, as you say, as a freelancer or a contractor. How important was that, you know, for you, Joe, and also for you, Gamal?
Joe, I'll let you go first.
Wow. Okay, no pressure. What I would say is, the thing about this book is, this book lays out the conditions of the industry and presents the creator with options about how to navigate.
Yes.
It's not an op-ed in the form of the book. It is an instruction manual.
Okay.
For how to establish yourself.
Yes.
As an independent contractor, and as an independent contractor, you are a business in human form.
Yes.
So how to establish yourself, and then how to move forward and operate. So the honesty that I perceive in it is that it makes very clear conditions, consequences, which are important.
Yes. Gamal, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when I was writing the book, and when I write, the books are actually an extension of the legal and business advice that I give to clients on a regular basis. So at no point do I want to actually, you want to draw a fine line between the fact that, you know, every person that you're talking to is in comics because they love comics.
Mm.
And you do not want at any point to kind of kill the dream.
Yes.
Like,
cool.
I started reading, you know, with Neil Adams, and
yes.
I still get, you know, giddy when I go into a convention and I see Carl Potts and I talk to him about Alien Legion and stuff like that.
Yes.
So you want to nurture that love of the medium, but at the same time give them the reality as it stands in the industry.
Yes.
If you look at any kind of attempts to find a career in narrative art, especially in the United States, those careers are by and large not supported. It is extremely difficult to have a long-term career where you are sustaining yourself with just the income coming from being a freelance, or being in creator-owned comics, or in being an independent. But I would prefer, there's going to be a certain number of people who read this book and say, okay, I now understand what it takes to be a freelance creator in comics, and I don't want to do that.
Okay.
And I would rather them, you know, take a few hours, read this book, and figure that out, and then just go back to reading comics and loving comics. It's fine.
Yes.
Rather than attempts to go 2, 3, 4, 5 years figuring out how comics work as a freelancer, and then realizing I don't want to be in freelance comics.
Yes.
If the book can help you kind of decide, well, okay, if this is what it really is, and I know I do not have the time, I do not have the risk tolerance, I do not have the wherewithal to go through this kind of crucible, great. I may have saved you 2 or 3 years of like stress and headache and, you know, lost revenue.
Yes.
That's great. But if you decide, no, I get it, and I'm jumping in anyway, then this book will kind of give you that roadmap to when you get into those inevitable questions and you're stumbling and you're confused. You can go back to the book and go, okay, this is what I have to do when, because there's situations where there's going to be too little work and you're kind of struggling to kind of navigate that. There also are going to be situations inevitably where there's too much work.
Yes.
And you now have to navigate that as well. It's going to be very rare that you're going to hit that sweet spot of just enough work and just enough money to kind of go through it. So helping you kind of figure out when feast or famine happens, how to deal with it. Or if you don't want to deal with it at all, I think that's what the book needs to do, and that needs to be honest to do that.
Yeah. So I mean, apart from the business side of things, there is what I see as like the etiquette side. So for example, like meeting editors, at shows and knowing about the appropriate times, to talk to people. And, there've been stories about people who've kind of pitched things, to people at inappropriate times. So I just wondered, um, is that something that the book covers as well, in a way that I
Oh,
presume that's
absolutely.
an aspect that the book covers as well.
Oh, absolutely. We focus on how to actually find clients on an online situation, how to find clients in an offline situation,
Mm.
how to deal with portfolio reviews, how
Yes.
to deal with pitches, how to write business proposals if you're not doing creative work.
Yes.
We There's a whole section on how to deal with Barcon.
Of
There's an
course.
entire section. So it's in terms of we try to go really deep into if you're going to try to find clients, we ask
Mm.
you to find we categorize different types of
Yes.
clients, but different
Yes.
types of clients require different types of approaches.
Yes.
And then how you actually match your dream client to your skill set to actually make that approach. We have a section that just covers personal referral and professional networking.
Yes.
So I try to be as comprehensive as possible because unlike books that are about the craft and the art of comics, I think there's a major need for books about the business and for those
Yes.
books comprehensive. So I attempted to leave no stone unturned in trying to help people figure out how those approaches are going to work, why they're going to work, and how to actually create a consistent kind of reputation online and offline that complement each other and will help you go from job to job with as little downtime as possible.
Yes. So obviously this is a huge subject. So I assume that you turn to Joe to kind of hone this to make sure that the information in there was kind of enough information, because obviously some of the subjects you've discussed, they're huge. So I
Mhm.
assume that Joe, you talked to Joe and said, look, this is what I'd like to cover. I'd like to use your considerable years of experience to say, these are the ways that we should approach these subjects, and the way that we should portray them in the book. I assume that was one of his roles as an editor.
Actually, when I set up the book itself, I came to Joe. I think I was a third of the way through the process. I think I was
Yes.
halfway through the process because what I did was I researched this book for about a year and a half. And then
Yes.
I had an outline that was probably like 120 pages long,
Blimey.
along with all
Okay.
the footnotes and references and
Blimey.
everything. So then by the time I came to Joe, it was not necessarily a fully formed idea, but the skeleton has already put in place. I
Yeah.
mean, if it was a TV series, I had already done the pilot.
Okay.
I
And
I
you've
may
written the
not have
Bible
the
already, basically. Yes.
yeah, I
Yes.
did yeah, I didn't have the finale. I may have had climax, but we already did the pilot.
Okay.
So what he was able to come in kind of I gave him the first, I want to say, Joe, was it half or two
Yep.
thirds?
Yeah, it was the
First
first half of
half
the
of the
book.
book. I
Okay.
said, see if you can make sense of this while I was working on the other half.
Yes.
Um, and then by the time Joe caught up to me wrapping up the book, he had actually informed and guided a lot of the second half so the book could finish stronger.
Yes.
Because all of the waiting around and kind of figuring things out in the beginning, I kind of did that on my own. So Joe didn't
Yes.
have to go through all that.
Hmm.
And, I let him come in for cleanup, actually make it look better.
Okay. So it's more of like the small details, basically, to make sure that they worked for the book once Joe was there.
But yes, but like I said before, it's the details and the proof of concept. Like,
Yes.
if I started to introduce theories and ideas and
Hmm.
like tactics, Joe's already been there. He's already
Yes.
seen all the
Yes.
tactics. He's seen what's worked and he's seen what doesn't work. And so he can actually speak to, well, okay, this should go in, this should be given a higher priority. This, you shouldn't, don't tell people to do that.
Mm.
And then, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. And I assume it also had to be very accessible to the audience, because that's very important, because it has to be a book that people can read and they can understand, and from different levels, as you say, from people just finishing their courses and thinking about what to do with their lives, to people who've been in the industry for a number of years. I assume that accessibility was key here. It was a very important part of the book for the reader.
Yeah, well, that's one of the other reasons I brought Joe in, because I didn't want, in like any narrative art, if you get bogged down in minutia, you are going to lose your reader.
Yes.
So I brought Joe in to kind of help make sure that things were accessible enough so that you're explaining business and legal concepts to people who, like I said, don't necessarily want to read about business and legal concepts, and in a way that is accessible without talking down to them.
Yes.
And I think part of the key there is to start with, I teach classes in a lot of business modeling for comics on a regular basis online. And every time I have a class, I start with the definition. Because a lot of times people, especially industry veterans, will start to just talk about concepts to people, never actually building the foundation to, do these people know what it is you're talking about in the first place?
Yes, of course. No, definitely, that's important.
So we start off with definitions. Then I try to give examples, and like I said, comic book examples are always the best example for a book about comics.
Yes.
And then you get into the tactics and the theories and the numbers. We actually put in I tried to put in a lot of data.
Yes.
Specifically economic data, so that people understand why they're asking for what it is that they're asking for.
Yes.
We start out with the concept of, okay, in the United States, in a single family household, how much does it actually cost?
Yes.
And we break down, how much does it cost for rent? How much does it cost to have a car? How much does it cost for all of these things? Then we look at, well, how much are you going to charge? With the understanding that a lot of the work that a freelancer does is unpaid labor. You don't get paid to go out and look for work, but you have to do it. You don't get paid for having to deal with your taxes, but you have to do it. So we take the entire body of work that you have to do to be a freelancer, because like Joe said, you are a business in human form.
Yes.
So there is no human resources department except for you. There is no accounting department except for you.
Yes.
Professional development, well, that's you too. And at a certain point, you have to actually draw the pages that someone asked you to draw. So how do you look at that and say, okay, I need to work X number of hours and charge Y number of dollars for any of this to make sense? Otherwise, we really want to help creators avoid burnout. We really want to help them avoid getting into a situation where they love what they're doing, but they're working 70 hours a week. I love comics too. I don't want to work at 70 hours.
No.
Because then when are you actually reading comics? You're not. You give up reading comics to working comics.
Yes.
So we want to actually give people the data so they can understand for their personal situation, what do they have to do and how much do they have to earn to make all of this viable?
Yes. So I was wondering, so you've done this as a crowdfunding project, the same thing with the first book. Why crowdfunding rather than going to a traditional publisher and saying, I've got this project, you obviously had a proposal. What are the pros and cons for you for crowdfunding? And I'm going to ask Joe as well, just to get his input.
Well, to go directly to the actual fan base, to the community of people who want the book, if you can crowdfund, and because a lot of my clients are actually very heavily invested in crowdfunding, I'm far more familiar with that. I have an agent. Joe and I actually share the same agent.
Oh, okay.
One of the major issues with going with traditional publishing is timing.
Yes.
Like I started writing the first book in 2018. I finished writing it in 2020 when I got my agent.
Yes.
In 2022, the agent still hadn't placed the book with a publisher.
Blimey.
So the information, business books like this, one of the reasons I started my online courses and classes is because the business is constantly shifting. If I wrote a book, if I released a book in 2020 and the publisher hasn't signed on to it until 2022, that means it's not going to get into their publishing schedule until 2024, which means it may not come out until 2025.
It's like 5 or 6 years since you started writing the book.
Which means I have to write the book all over again.
Yes.
Or I could go crowdfunding and the campaign can be over by October. People can get the book in November and then they can start reading it.
Yes. Okay.
Just from a timeliness standpoint for a book like this, crowdfunding makes far more sense, particularly because the magic of crowdfunding is in the name. If you have a crowd, then you can get funding. And because I've had so many clients over the past 25 years, and because I've written and taught about the industry online for about 12, 13 years, there's quite a few people who already knew who I was.
Yes.
And if I said I had this book that was basically a distillation of everything that I put together, they're like, yeah, I'll give you $30 for that. Sure.
Yes, yes.
Not a problem.
So Joe, what are your thoughts on crowdfunding for this particular project?
I mean, in addition to what Gamal said about the shortened window of time between production and delivery to the buyers, to me, this provides more targeted marketing, right? Because when you're dealing with a big trade house, they might not know how or where to market this.
It might get lost, I guess.
But with crowdfunding, it's whoever helped pay for it, ship it out to them.
Yes.
That's it. It's a very simple, streamlined, robust kind of operation. And I think that actually speaks to the nature of the career of freelancers in the comic book industry. And quite frankly, creators need the valuable information that this book is going to provide yesterday.
Yes.
They need it as soon as possible.
Yes.
So they can start transforming and igniting and improving their business plans immediately. So the kind of schedule that the book is on now, they can read it over the Christmas holiday and they can start 2024 off hitting the ground running.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to ask what the 3 most important takeaways are from the book, you know, for readers to boil it down. And I'd like to ask both of you. So like 3 things from this huge book with this massive subject. So I want 3 things, you know, that people should take away from the book. What are the 3 most important things from this book?
The first thing that you should actually understand from this book is that there are a wide variety of options in how you can actually have a freelance career and who you can work for. You've got to be able to look beyond Marvel and DC to the rest of the universe of possibilities of where you can actually generate revenue. The second thing you need to understand is your reputation in the industry over time is going to be your most valuable asset. And you're going to build that reputation with the way you conduct business, the way you actually acquire clients, the way you actually negotiate your compensation, the way you actually, you know, deliver work. And the final thing that you need to understand is you have to strive to be compensated for everything that you do. The more you can actually resolve the tension between lost labor and actual compensation, the closer you will get to actually having a career where you do not have to do anything else but make comics. The more work you give away for free, the more in the hole you're going to be. The more you try to overextend yourself and work 23 hours a day, the closer you're going to get to burnout. So if you can balance compensation with your actual efforts, you're going to be in a much better space. So those are the 3 things I think.
So Joe, what are your thoughts, you know, adding to what Gamal just said?
So I would say, number 1, if you're going to be a professional in the business, you have a set of responsibilities to yourself.
Mhm.
You have a set of responsibilities to your clients. Both of those have to be met. So it's those two things. And I think the third thing is that business is your friend.
Yes.
Business is not this annoying thing that you need to deal with so you can get back to the cool stuff. It's not something to get out of the way. It's not something to avoid. This book is your ally to be successful. And if you look at any successful person in entertainment, there's a business apparatus, there's a business education at the foundation about how they do what they do. So it's important that creators embrace this book. You know, they should be excited to have it. And I think when they read it, it's just going to be like blinders pulled off their eyes again and again. And I think they'll see where, oh, I remember when I did that. Oh, okay, I might have a situation coming up. This is good to know. So embrace business.
Okay, cool. So the book is currently on Kickstarter at the moment. What date does it end? What date does the campaign end?
It ends right around the time of New York Comic Con. So I think it ends on the 19th, which may be right after Comic Con.
No, I think that's oh yeah, it's right after Comic Con.
Yeah,
right.
The New York show is the 12th to the 15th.
12th to 15th.
So it's
That's
the
right.
week after.
Yeah.
So you'll have a last minute opportunity, but I wanted to get the date in, you know, to this, and we're gonna put the Kickstarter URL on there as well, so that people will be able to check out the campaign once they're listening to this as well. So obviously I want people to be aware that they can still support it, and I want this to go up. It's going to go up fairly soon because I want people to check this out, to be honest, while the campaign is live, and
great.
an extra boost. So listen, thank you so much to both of you. It's been amazing. Gamal, thank you for your time. Joe, it's always a pleasure. And I hope, Gamal, if you're at New York, you know, it'd be great for us to meet, because we're doing a panel.
Oh, absolutely.
On the Thursday morning about comics journalism. You're welcome, you know, to come along, and we should try and, you know, definitely get to meet in the flesh.
Absolutely. But what time is your panel? Because
It's 10:45 to 11:45 on Thursday.
Oh, I have to do the continuing legal education panel.
Oh, I'm sorry, but then we got the whole show so that we can meet up the other days. Well, it would be great to meet you. It'd be, you know, great to see you in the flesh, as I say.
Oh, absolutely. I don't have any other panels Friday or Saturday, so I will be around. So let's schedule something.
Okay, perfect.